Well, good morning. I feel like half the church has disappeared with the kids today. They're outnumbering us. We looked at teams a little bit last week, didn't we? Remember my uni example? But who here was into sports day at school? Yeah. Who was good at sports day? I bet you were good, George. Yeah. What was your favourite activity to do? Or if you didn't like it, what was your most tolerable activity that you had to do? What we got? We've got a sprinting. What else have we got? Who was good at? Yeah, Jane would her shot put. Yeah. Did anyone like the relay race? Yeah? Not too bad. For some reason, I don't know what it was about me, I would always get picked for the relay race. I don't know what it was. It was just what is it about me that you could that just screams relay race. No, the thing is, I enjoyed the relay race, but if you were not the first one, what happens? There's a little bit less pressure because someone is handing you the baton, and if they have not done a very good job, if they've not made it in a decent time to you, you can sort of feel like, oh, well, what's the point? Do you know what I mean? It all depends on the baton coming to you at the right time. But so there's like a process, there's a team effort, isn't there, And really, you wanted every single person to do well, because if one person didn't do too well, that would have a big effect on the rest. I mean, maybe sometimes maybe they just thought I was really fast. Maybe they thought I would be like the one to recover it later on. If it didn't go well to start with, maybe if you're really quick, you could pull it back. But there's a team effort. Now, I wanted to look at today. So I can hear a bit of buzzing. Maybe could we turn channel 23 down? There we go. Yeah. Now I wanted to look at what the Bible calls an apostle. We know the term, don't we? And we've got really big, famous examples. Apostle Paul is probably the most notable. But when we were at Bible college, and we would have to spend a little bit of time looking at this, apostle, for those of us who don't know, it just simply means a sent one. It is a sent one. And sometimes, though I'm not very well versed in it, apparently in classic literature, the word would even pop up in other contexts, maybe for naval envoys or something like that, because it is a sent one. It is, you are sending a representation of yourself to a certain place to do a certain thing. They are an apostle of whatever's sending them. So in our case, an apostle of Jesus Christ. They're being sent. And actually, at Bible college, we looked at the different levels of apostle. And first, we have Jesus, who is referred to, he is the chief apostle. Because he himself, if you look at it through that theological lens, he himself was sent. He came from a place of eternity, the heavenly kingdom. And if we look at it through that lens, when he took on mortality, he was sent to the world to do a specific task, which was quite a big one. It was, to conquer sin and death and create a bridge for every single person, if they would come to him, that a way has been made. That it was no longer only a select few. It was actually anyone who comes, they put their faith and trust in Jesus, not in their own works or righteousness, but in what he's done, and they follow him. They make a bridge into eternity. So he is the chief apostle. Does that make sense? He is the sent one. That was his big mission. Then we look at the 12 apostles. And it says, again, you can argue with the scholars if you want, but it says they've almost got a different level to what we would refer to the word today. Because we may have people who we would regard or class as apostles today, but it says the 12, they had a very special type of apostleship. And what we see is they could usually do signs and wonders, pretty good signs and wonders. And what some of the scholars would say is part of that authority was so they could authenticate the Word of God. Does that make sense? So they couldn't just refer to the New Testament, could they? How we've got, and I was just like, we'll preach from the New Testament. They couldn't just do that, could they? Because they had the Old Testament, as we looked at a little bit last week, but then Jesus was changing everything. So how do you give credibility to that? If someone just comes along and they say, oh, by the way, these traditions, these beliefs we've held for thousands of years, Jesus has got something to say about that. That would be quite problematic, wouldn't it? So part of that, some scholars say that the miracles, the signs and wonders that the 12 apostles could bring was God's way of authenticating, of saying, I have put authority on this. Now, that's quite a difficult, big topic anyway, because we know that's not just the sole reason for miracles, signs and wonders, but part of that was to bring that authority. If you got to put yourself in that position. If you're just moving, you're traveling to a town where no one's ever heard of you before, they don't know anything about you, and you're trying to bring this brand new belief or theology or ideology, whatever they would view it as, that's going to be a tough sell, isn't it? If you've not got anything to back that up. Thankfully, we can refer to the Bible, and I really believe the Bible has its own authority. That, do you know what? For thousands of years, even the New Testament, for thousands of years, it has remained. How amazing is that? I know we can just gloss over it like, well, it's all right. But seriously, you think of all the belief systems, all the ideologies, all the empires or nations that have risen and fallen and come and gone in 2,000 years. That is a lot. Think about how much we just won't even know, how much has been lost due to that time frame. But yet, the Word of God, the Old and the New Testament, has remained. Not only that, it is, I guess, for the most part, you could say it's known globally. I know there's some places it isn't, but for the most part, most places will have some awareness of the name of Jesus Christ, right? Not everywhere, and we know there's still a job to do and important work missionaries do, but for a lot of the globe, that name is known. What started in the Middle East with Jesus and 12, 13 of his people, of his disciples, that belief system, that framework that he essentially brought now thousands of years is known globally. Don't you think that's incredible? I mean, to me, I always think that's incredible, because we take it for granted, like the internet, and we think, well, it's not that difficult to spread a message. That would have been insanely hard. There's no internet. There's no let me just send a WhatsApp to my buddy in the church in Damascus or wherever we go. There's none of that. It would just be, right, we need to pick someone. Like, George, can you go to, we'll send you to France or somewhere. We're just going to ship you off somewhere. Tell them about Jesus, okay? Here's a letter that Paul's tried to put together. It's, keep it safe, because if we lose it, that's it, it's gone. And we're going to send you off. That is a tough. But these people that worked with Paul, these apostles, and these sent ones, through what they have done, thousands of years later, it was in Clay Cross, we're talking about the teachings of Jesus. I mean, how do you think Apostle Paul would have felt about that? Do you think he could have envisioned it? Like, in Clay Cross, we're talking about Jesus, me duck. What would you... I mean, he was a man of faith, but come on, I'm sure even him, he probably would have struggled to see the far-reaching impact and effects of what he was doing. Could he have even envisioned we just sat around Derbyshire, Clay Cross, talking about the Son of God, Jesus? But it shows how important it is that what he did, because he himself was a sent one. And we have different versions of apostle. We have the Pauline model where scholars say it's people sent to a certain place, but as they were quick to point out in Bible college, they're like, but don't think that means everyone has to be moving around. He said there's also the Peter, the Petrine model, that he was an apostle, he pretty much stayed put for the most part. And even though he was an apostle, he served faithfully in one main area for most of the time. But he was still classed as a sent one, because that was his mission. That's where he'd been sent. That was the purpose. And when I'm just looking at this and I think of how does this affect us today? Because maybe we wouldn't want to say, oh, well, I'm on the same level as Apostle Paul. Me and him, we're like, but I do believe God has put us here for a reason. I can't fully articulate what that is, and life can be, a big mystery to us. There's a lot of stuff that happens that we might not have predicted or we would have thought would happen. But for the most part, I do believe God has a reason for us, for being even here. I know free will comes into it and we have a lot of choice, but God is bigger than our mistakes, isn't he? He's bigger than our framework. So I think, what does it mean for us as a church? I do believe that each one of us, in some way, God has a reason we're here. I know it's easy to just think, oh, well, Debbie makes me laugh. Her story when she joined the church. You know what she said to me when she turned up? And this is a great story. I love this. She says, when we came to church, actually we were looking for a different one. She says we'd found another one online, and we were looking for a different one, and we couldn't find it. And then we just saw this one on the street, and we thought, well, let's give it a go. Let's try it. And I love that story, because I think, you know what? I don't know which one it was you were looking for, but the thing is, even though to us some things may seem like chance, I do believe God has a place for us here. And I know we have to choose it. We have to choose to have a place. But I think as a community, as a church, as a family, what does God want me, you, to be doing? If we view ourselves through the lens of, actually, I'm not just here as a guest or a visitor, but when you feel comfortable and when you've decided this is your home church, through that lens of, as a sent one of Jesus Christ, of the chief apostle, as a sent one, what is my mission here? We all have the big mission, we know that, to the Great Commission, to make disciples. We all come under that. But more specifically, how does my giftings, my personality, my character fit into that? Does that make sense? We looked at some values, this kingdom heart at the beginning of the year, because that is important to how we do things. But actually, the giftings we use will be put on that. The values, they create sort of a foundation. It will govern these internal principles in which how I will act. But then the giftings that I place on top of that will create an action, an effect. So what giftings can we use? We look at the big example of Paul, because his history was not very good. I have a sneaky suspicion that if we were to see him today, if this was to happen today, I don't think, and I understand it, by the way, but I'm not sure many of us would use Paul. I'm trying to think of AOG, I'm thinking of like a general conference. I'm like, you know what? Things can get a bit hairy if people disagree with certain things. I'm like, imagine if we had someone, I know it's a different culture, different context, but when he was Saul, he did a lot of damage to the church. And I'm speaking lightly there, like, it wasn't good. He did, there have been a lot of aggrieved parties. But yet, the mercy, the grace of God, that can be so hard to wrap your head around. But God saw him and said, that, shall we call it zeal, that energy, that passion that he's used to harm my church, I'm not going to just take him out. I am going to capture that energy, that zeal, that passion, I guess, if we want to say, is that I'm going to capture that and I'm going to repurpose it. And what you once did to destroy my church, you will do to build up. That is, and who would have thought to do that? Only God. Because I know what I would have thought. I'd have thought through my earthly mind, through a logical mind, like he's a threat, he needs taking out, and we'll just leave it there. We'll just put him to one side and, get him out of the picture, and then we can focus on doing the good work of God again. And God's like, this person here that everyone's going to have a bit of fear over, rightly so, we're going to use him, and he is going to become one of the most important figures in the early church. And through his actions, it is going to spread the gospel to nations far and wide that will be told for thousands and thousands of years. And that is someone who started their journey on the other side, shall we say, doing a lot of damage to the kingdom of God. And I say that because our story is not going to be the same as Paul's, but sometimes we can rule ourselves out with things. We think, well, how can God use me? If he can use Saul, I think he could pretty much use anyone. So I'm sure most of us, whatever we've done in our past, maybe we've all done bad things, I don't know, but I'm sure we could all probably say, looking at it through the lens of Saul, I've probably never done things quite like he's done, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? And yet, he was used. What could God use us for? Sent ones. From Galatians 1:11-14 says this, "For you have heard of my former conduct in Judaism, how I persecuted the church of God beyond measure and tried to destroy it." That is Paul. He's saying, you've heard, you know about me, you know about my past. But he is repurposed, he's changed. If he can do that, what can he do for us? Now, before we go into communion, I want to just look at this main story. I say before we go into it, the main story. We all know it, so I don't need to go over it too much. But Matthew 14:13-21, a famous story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. This, to me, illustrates how important partnership is with God. That it's not just a theory. It's not just something we teach. It's not just something we say because we want someone to serve on a team or something like that. We really believe that partnership with God is important because we have this story. Let me just read through some of it. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Seems logical, seems reasonable. It's getting late. Maybe let's wrap it up. Lord, come on, we've got these crowds, but we're getting a bit hungry. This is kind of a remote place. Can you imagine saying that to Jesus? This is a remote place. There's a lot of people. It's getting late. Shall we wind it down? Let's wrap it up. Who would be in that camp? Who'd be agreeing with that? Who'd be wanting to get home? Yeah. Jesus replied, this is what you want to hear, isn't it? "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." You'd be thinking, do you think they were a bit nervous around him sometimes? Thinking, we never know what he's going to come out with, honestly. It's like, Jesus, it's getting late. Like, they don't need to go anywhere. You give them something to eat. How? What am I giving them? We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. So you can imagine. You can imagine them awkwardly maybe looking at each other like, he's doing something weird again. He said, we need to feed this large crowd. We've got like a bit of bread and 2 fish. Like, what do we do? So something's going to happen. "Bring them here to me," he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. taking the loaves and the 2 fish, looking up to heaven, he gave thanks, broke the loaves, then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. So do we catch that? It's really easy to miss because it's not even given a big emphasis. Like it's not that important. But Jesus, he looked up to heaven. He gave thanks. So he gained the authority, didn't he? He got the authority from God, from Jesus. He brought the miracle. He brings the miracle. But then he gives the bread. Who did he give it to? The disciples. He said, I'm gonna give it to the disciples, and then the disciples are going to give it to the people. And I think this illustrates that whatever different theological beliefs we have, I think we can't get away from that. To God, partnership matters. Because, and again, this is just my sort of, fantasy sci-fi mind thinking here, but if you have all the powers of God, okay, you could do anything. If you've got some hungry people, I've used this example before, but if you've got some hungry people in front of you and you have power over everything, doesn't it seem like a bit of a convoluted way to let's get these people fed? Like you could just click your fingers and like no one's going to be hungry tonight. They're just going to feel full. It's fine because I have command over the powers of nature and the laws of physics. So if I click my fingers, no one's getting hungry. He did it with sickness. No one's getting sick. But he says, we're going to feed people. We're going to do it from what little there is. We're going to appeal to God, and the authority will come. The multiplication will come from God, and we're going to hand that to my disciple. I'm not handing it out. I'm not going to go around and just hand it out myself. I'm giving this to my disciples. My disciples will take it, and then the disciples will take it to the people. Partnership. What we do, this thing we call church, it does matter. Because in a way, this is him giving us the bread. And when we go out on Monday or Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever, in a way, are we carrying that bread? Are we taking it to the people? The multiplication, I love that. It comes from him. We can't claim that. I love that. It comes from him, from God. But we can carry the bread to the people. The bread of life to the people. We've probably all, maybe we've had times in our life where someone's once said to us, there's just something different about you. Maybe they've not even known you're a Christian or anything like that. I know I've experienced this, and people have just said there's just something different. Because whether we realize it or not, you are carrying something from God. You're carrying it. Sometimes people notice it, sometimes they don't, but you are carrying it. So are we giving that bread to the people? That we want to let that flow, that pipeline, that living waters. We don't want to be the block. I don't want it to just stop with me. I want to let that flow. So I want to use my giftings in church. I want to build up the kingdom. But when I go out on Monday, Tuesday, I want to be carrying that living water, that bread of life to people. Is that okay? And each one of us, we can do that. That is not just for the select few. That is are you a disciple? Do you follow Jesus? Then you carry my bread. You give it to the people. And everyone will be full. Sometimes we're not going to feel it. Sometimes we're going to be thinking this is a remote place. It's getting late. Let's wind it down. And he's going to say, well, actually, we've got some multiplication to do. We've got some bread to hand out. Like Jesus, it's nearly 9, Something like Traitors is on, or Love Island, or something like it's getting like, no. We're going to give the bread to the people. Does that make sense? It's not always going to be convenient, but give room for God to give that bread to you, to give that bread to the people. We're going to go into communion.